They say the devil's in the details, but I found mine curled in the shape of a receipt from an upscale jeweler, one I hadn't stepped foot in since our anniversary 2 years prior, tucked neatly inside a book on naval warfare I kept in the downstairs study. The book hadn't been opened in months, but Clara had always liked hiding things where she assumed I wouldn't look. She once slipped a note about finding herself into my Navy commendation folder and forgot about it until I found it 3 months later, wedged between medals for operations she could barely pronounce. The receipt wasn't addressed to her, nor to me, but to him, my cousin Jared, the same weasel who used to get lost in his own backyard and now somehow manages the family estate as if he's some kind of aristocrat in training. The date matched a weekend I'd been out of town evaluating a vintage globe in Charleston. Clara, supposedly, was visiting her sister for mental clarity. Funny how clarity costs $7,800 and comes with complimentary engraving. So I sat in my leather chair, the one she used to call Grandpa's throne, and stared at the receipt like it had slapped me. Not because I was surprised, that part of me had been exorcised during the tail end of our marriage, bled out like motor oil from a cracked engine, but because it confirmed something I'd quietly suspected since our split began smelling more like strategy than heartbreak. Clara always had a talent for playing the long game. She wore patience like perfume and control like couture. I remember, during the divorce mediation, how she requested certain heirlooms with the indifference of a poker player discarding low cards, the decanter set, the armoire, and that damned watch I knew she never truly cared for. The Rolex my father gave me when I retired from the Navy, with the inscription on the back, "In precision, there is honor." She said it should go to our son, eventually, and I agreed, stupidly thinking eventually meant when the boy turned 30, not whenever she and Jared decided to gift it to themselves. But the book, that was the real message. Clara never read anything without purpose. If she'd left the receipt in a cookbook or a fashion mag, I'd have shrugged it off. But my book, one she never even touched during our marriage, the one with my notes in the margins and dog-eared pages from my active duty days, that wasn't accidental. That was a breadcrumb. She wanted me to find it, or at least didn't care if I did. Maybe she thought it would humiliate me. Maybe she believed I'd spiral, that I'd show up at the Christmas gathering with rage on my breath and accusations flying. But I don't do drama. I do structure. I do layers. I do patience. And more than anything, I do revenge the way my father taught me to do everything else: quiet, clean, and irreversible. The estate was already being decorated when I RSVP'd. Jared's assistant, yes, the fool has an assistant now, sent out one of those self-important digital invitations with gold-embossed pine cones and a list of expected attire. Family traditions reimagined, it said in italic script, as though generational dignity could be filtered through Canva. I packed my things deliberately, the clothes I knew I'd wear for appearances, the small flask my grandfather handed down, and one item I hadn't touched in months, a velvet-lined case containing an exact replica of the Rolex. It had taken 6 phone calls and a favor from a watchmaker I once saved from bankruptcy, but it was perfect, down to the microscopic scratch next to the winding crown. The real one stayed locked away until I knew exactly when and where it would matter. That night, after finding the receipt, I placed the original on my kitchen counter beside a glass of scotch, stared at it for a long while, and whispered, "Let's go home." Not to forgive, not to forget, but to reclaim. Because some heirlooms aren't just metal and time, they're blood. And no matter how polished the thief, you can't fake a man's legacy. At first, it was just little things, harmless, explainable, forgettable, the kind of shifts you dismiss because marriage, like an old house, is allowed to creak now and then without assuming the whole foundation's rotted. Clara started going for walks after dinner, claiming the air helped her think more clearly. I didn't question it. We'd both grown quieter in the evenings anyway, and I figured maybe she just needed space. Then the walks became drives, and the drives became weekends away, always visiting her sister, or recharging or taking time for herself, phrases she delivered with the smooth certainty of someone who'd rehearsed them. When she returned, she brought back candles I'd never smelled before, makeup she never wore around me, and a new silk robe that still had the tag half torn off when I found it in the dryer. I told myself she was just trying to feel good again. We were getting older. Maybe she needed to reawaken that spark I'd watched flicker over the years. Maybe she was finding herself. But every time she came back, she seemed more refreshed, not from rest, but from distance, like I was the static she needed to escape. She began talking about boundaries, not in anger, not even defensively, just in this offhand, clinical way that felt like she was quoting a therapist I hadn't met. "I've realized I need more autonomy in how I spend my time," she said once, while stirring tea with the same spoon I'd used to stir her soup every Sunday for 2 decades. I nodded. I told her I supported her. Because I did. Or at least I wanted to. But then she started locking her phone. Not in a suspicious way, no frantic screen flipping or texting in the bathroom. Just casually, like she'd read a blog post about digital independence and decided to apply it. She put passwords on her laptop, changed the settings so her calendar no longer synced to our shared device. She said it was for mental clarity, that she was learning to separate her energy. The first time she used the word energy, unironically, I laughed. She didn't. I started noticing other cracks, receipts in her coat pockets for places we never dined at, small luxury items in our home that she never used but wouldn't explain. A designer handbag she kept in the closet but never wore. A scarf that wasn't her color and definitely not her style. Once, I found a partially consumed bottle of cologne in the glove compartment of her car, a brand I hadn't worn since my 20s and one I was damn sure she didn't buy for me. I asked her about it, casually, like I was joking. She smiled, said it must have been mine from way back, and that I probably left it there myself. Except I hadn't driven her car in over a year, and I'd never stored cologne in glove compartments. That's not something you forget, like misplacing a pen. That's deliberate. That's ritual. Still, I wanted to believe. It's strange, the things your mind does when it wants to protect your heart. You start building narratives, excuses, justifications. You remember anniversaries she remembered. The way she still made your coffee just the way you liked it, even if she stopped sitting at the table with you while you drank it. You tell yourself she's just tired, stressed, evolving. You tell yourself marriages go through phases, that maybe this is just hers. You even begin to admire her from a distance. How elegant she's become, how confidently she moves, like someone who's finally figured out who she is. You ignore the way she no longer asks how your day was, how she forgets the name of your new colleague but remembers, oddly, the name of your cousin's dog, how she starts wearing perfume to book club, and how her book club meets in a hotel conference room now. You hear the lie but pretend it's a miscommunication. You feel the sting but call it a draft. I never asked where she was going when she left that Saturday morning with her overnight bag and that sharp, new trench coat. I never asked why she suddenly preferred to ride with Jared to the family gatherings, claiming it was more efficient since they were both on that side of town. I never questioned why she started referring to herself in individual terms, my plans, my side of the family, my future. I just watched, from the edges, like a man observing a home slowly lose heat, one vent at a time. You don't notice it at first. You tell yourself it's just the season. But eventually, you stop taking off your coat. Eventually, you realize the warmth isn't coming back. And the worst part? She still smiled. Not cruelly. Not with malice. Just with indifference. Like she'd left the marriage weeks ago and forgot to mention it. And there I was, still believing I could fix the temperature. It happened in the stillest way, the kind of moment that doesn't announce itself with sound or fury but slips in through the side door of your reality and locks it behind you. I was in the garage, organizing my tools, the last ritual in my life that still made sense, when I heard Clara's car pull in unusually early for a Sunday afternoon. She didn't know I was home. I hadn't planned to be. I'd canceled lunch with a friend last minute because something in my gut had been gnawing all morning, and I wanted silence, the kind of silence that tells you what people won't. I heard her walk inside, heels clicking like punctuation marks, and then I heard a voice. Not hers, not mine, but male, low, too close, and laughing. It was coming from the Bluetooth speakers in the living room. She was playing a voice message aloud, probably by accident, while fumbling with her phone. That's the only reason I heard it. One of those accidental slip-ups you could never plan for, only be present enough to catch. I didn't move. I just listened. He called her Firebird. Said he missed the way she looked in the black thing with the side slit. Said he couldn't wait until they could stop pretending that the family estate could be theirs by spring. Then he chuckled. Said, "Does he still think it's going to your son?" That's adorable. I stood there, staring at my wrench drawer, the neatly aligned rows I'd polished last week, and felt something in me stop. Not like a break, more like a gear locking into place. The kind of stillness that soldiers know when the air shifts before gunfire. Clara didn't say anything in response to the message. She didn't need to. The silence after it ended said everything. She didn't rush to delete it. She didn't panic. She just turned the music off and went upstairs like it was just another Sunday. And maybe to her, it was. But for me, it was the moment the world narrowed. Not in rage, not in heartbreak, but in vision. I didn't need to ask who it was. Jared's voice had always irritated me. He pronounced mirror like it had 3 syllables. But it wasn't his voice that gutted me. It was the language, the entitlement, the ownership, the certainty in his tone, like I was already buried, and they were just deciding where to plant flowers. I didn't confront her. I didn't storm in, demand answers, raise my voice, or even show my face. I simply turned off the light in the garage, walked back to the study, and sat in my father's old leather chair. I poured a glass of bourbon, opened my laptop, and began drafting a guest list for the Christmas gathering. The one Clara and Jared would both attend. The one hosted at the estate he thought was already his. I added my son's name first, then my mother's, then a few cousins, just to make it look normal. I added Clara. I added Jared. Then I stared at their names for a long time. I wasn't imagining betrayal anymore. I was staring at its schedule, and I wasn't hurt. That's the part no one tells you. You think it'll feel like heartbreak, like an explosion, but it doesn't. It feels like accounting. A series of numbers that don't add up. A ledger that suddenly needs balancing. I closed the laptop. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel anything. I just knew what needed to be done. Not loudly, not publicly, but with precision, with legacy. Because if Clara thought she could rewrite our family's narrative with a few well-timed messages and a fresh pair of heels, she'd forgotten one thing. I still held the pen. I didn't need to hire a private investigator. I'd spent 20 years watching Clara lie to herself about being a good person, so watching her lie to me was just a matter of calibration. I started with the calendar. Not hers, mine. I backtracked every trip she claimed she took over the last 6 months, checking timestamps on gas station receipts, food delivery records, the odd grocery store charge when she'd forget to switch from our joint card to her personal one. I logged patterns. She claimed she visited her sister twice last month. Funny, because her sister posted a tagged photo from a Napa retreat that same weekend, and Clara didn't appear in a single frame. I didn't say a word. I just noted the discrepancy, highlighted it, and moved on. Then I started laying bait. I told her I was attending an overnight military memorabilia expo in Raleigh, made up the whole damn event. She smiled too quickly and asked too few questions. That's how I knew she'd already made plans. While I slept in a hotel 2 hours away, I was actually parked at the Airstrip Cafe near the estate, sipping burnt coffee and watching Jared's Tesla creep into the long gravel drive at exactly 9:12 p.m. It was a Thursday. Clara wasn't supposed to be there, but there she was, stepping out of the passenger side like she'd been driven home from prom. I didn't follow them inside. I didn't need to. I already knew. What I wanted was behavior, rhythm, data I could compare. Because revenge, real revenge, doesn't come from catching people. It comes from understanding them well enough to make them catch themselves. I installed nothing. No spyware, no bugs, no hidden cameras. Clara didn't need to be watched. She needed to be listened to. So I listened. She started using new words, phrases I recognized from Jared's self-help podcast. Emotional bandwidth, toxic obligation, reclaiming my narrative. The kind of language people use when they want to ruin something and sound brave doing it. I let her talk. I asked open-ended questions I already knew the answers to. Did you end up making it to that networking event? I'd ask, knowing she spent the evening at the estate's wine cellar. How's your sister's recovery going? I'd say, after confirming she hadn't spoken to her in over a month. She never flinched. Her lies had muscle memory. But I was watching her timing. I noticed how long it took her to respond when I said Jared's name in casual conversation. 3 seconds too fast when pretending indifference, 4 seconds too slow when pretending surprise. I began leaving notes around the house, not for her, but for myself, mental cues to check certain email accounts, confirm certain travel logs, verify the location stamps on the photos she posted to her locked, close friends Instagram list. She didn't know I had access to an old backup of her account from when I set up her phone during an upgrade. One night, she posted a filtered sunset with a caption, "Home is a feeling, not a place." She tagged no one, but the file name of the image showed a geotag from the estate, Jared's place. Still, I said nothing. I kissed her on the cheek every morning. I brewed her coffee, even though she'd stopped drinking it. I asked if she wanted to take a weekend trip together, a fake one, of course. She declined, citing a deep emotional block she was working through. I nodded, told her I understood, that I respected her space, that she should take all the time she needed. She smiled with teeth and went upstairs to do whatever it is you do when you're orchestrating betrayal from your bedroom. Meanwhile, I went into the garage, opened the fireproof safe behind my tool rack, and pulled out the velvet box. The replica was perfect. I stared at it for a long time, running my fingers over the cool surface, rehearsing the moment I would make the exchange. It would have to be seamless. It would have to be surgical. It would happen at the Christmas gathering, in the room where Jared kept his collectibles, a room he bragged about more than anything else in his life, aside from Clara. I wouldn't say a word. I'd simply swap the real Rolex for the replica, quietly deliver the original to my son before the night ended, and let time do what it does best, reveal. Clara didn't suspect anything. She was too busy constructing her future with someone who had no past. She thought she'd won, that I was either too oblivious or too weak to notice. But I wasn't asleep. I was awake. And when men like me wake up, we don't shout. We don't plead. We design. I wasn't searching for closure. I was preparing the stage. And every time she lied with that effortless grace, I let her. Because the greatest part of any hunt isn't the moment the predator strikes, it's the stretch of silence where the prey thinks it's safe. The proof came wrapped in satin and arrogance, not from Clara, but from Jared, of all people, the man too stupid to keep his mouth shut when he thought he was finally ahead. It happened at the Christmas gathering, not during the meal, not during the wine-soaked toasts, but quietly, in the sitting room where Jared showed off his so-called legacy cabinet. A gaudy glass case filled with inherited nonsense he didn't earn and collectibles he barely understood. I stood beside him as he unlocked it with the same flourish I'd seen my father use decades ago, the same cabinet I used to clean as a boy. "Check this out," he said, grinning like a magician before a trick. "This is the Rolex your dad left, right? Clara said it should stay here, legacy piece, you know?" He tapped the glass like it was an aquarium, and I nodded slowly, watching the replica sit on its velvet cushion like a corpse dressed for a funeral. I said nothing, just stared, like a man memorizing coordinates before launching a missile. Later that evening, I asked Clara to step outside with me, said I needed a moment alone with her. The patio was cold, quiet. Twinkling lights from the rooftop cast a dim reflection on the snow-dusted garden below. I handed her a small envelope, not dramatic, just plain and white, no handwriting. Inside was a high-resolution photo I'd printed just hours before, her in Jared's lap, taken from the estate's back window 2 weeks ago. The same black dress from the voice message. His hand around her waist, her face buried in his neck. She opened the envelope slowly, glanced at the photo for no more than 2 seconds before snapping her head up with a forced smile and said, "This isn't what it looks like." I said nothing, just kept my eyes on hers, unwavering. We were talking. It got emotional. "You've been so distant, I didn't know how to talk to you anymore," she added, trying to thread together sympathy and logic like it was some kind of net. I still said nothing. That's when her voice rose just slightly, a quiver in the syllables. "You have no idea what it's like being with someone who never shows weakness, who's always 10 steps ahead. Do you have any idea how invisible I felt?" Her voice cracked, but I saw it, the performance twitch, the practiced vulnerability. And then the shift. "You weren't exactly husband of the year, David. You buried yourself in antiques and legacy and control." Jared listened. He made me feel real. I raised an eyebrow, just slightly. "Real?" I asked. Just that one word. And it hit her like a backhand. Her tone shifted again. "Now the clause. You know what? Maybe this is your fault. Maybe if you had paid half as much attention to me as you did to that damn watch, I wouldn't have needed someone else." She smiled then, a cruel, small thing, like a cat who thinks the bird is already dead. "And maybe Jared's better for this family than you ever were." I looked at her then, truly looked, and said, "That's why I gave the real watch to our son last night. I figured it should belong to someone with an actual future." The color drained from her face, and for the first time in this entire charade, she blinked, not once, but rapidly, trying to process what I just said. "What do you mean, real watch?" she asked, the bravado now flaking from her voice. I stepped closer, not threatening, not dramatic, just final. "The one in Jared's display case? It's a fake. A perfect one, but fake nonetheless. I made the switch before dinner. And he can keep that. Seems fitting, really." Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, but no words came out. The silence stretched. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was dread. Not because of the watch, but because for the first time, she realized I'd been awake the entire time, watching, planning, letting her script her own downfall. You don't get to rewrite our history with lies and lipstick, Clara, I said, calm as glass, and you don't get to inherit what was never yours. Her eyes were wide now, glistening not from tears but from the horrifying realization that she'd been playing chess with a man who had built the board. Still, I didn't leave. I stood there with her in the cold, the winter air cutting through our silence like a scalpel. The music from the house filtered out behind us, muffled by glass and distance, and in that moment, everything hung in the balance, her shame, my restraint, the future we'd both burned from opposite ends. I let the tension hang, let it throb between us like a second heartbeat. I wasn't finished yet, and she knew it. You smothered me, she said, voice cracking like a whip, the kind of line that sounds powerful in a journal entry but pathetic in real life when you're shouting it in a dimly lit garden next to a man who hasn't blinked in over a minute. You never let me breathe. Every decision had to go through your little filters of logic and control, like I was living in some kind of museum exhibit. She paused, expecting a reaction, something, a flinch, a sigh, a roll of the eyes. But I gave her nothing. Just stood there, watching her, the way you might watch a stranger try to rearrange a house that's already burned down. Say something, she demanded, the volume rising like steam from a pot left unattended. You're just going to stand there and pretend this is all my fault? I tilted my head slightly and said, no pretending necessary. That was when the veneer cracked. The tears came next, not soft and sorrowful, but weaponized, loud, calculated sobs like a script handed down from 100 divorce dramas. I gave you the best years of my life, she sobbed, hands clenched into fists. I tried. You think it was easy being married to someone who always thinks they're the smartest person in the room. No, I replied, calmly, but it was easier than being married to someone who thought they could get away with treason. Her jaw clenched at that. She wanted to retort, wanted to call it melodramatic, overblown. But she knew it wasn't. She knew I'd chosen that word with surgical intent. Treason isn't about the act. It's about betrayal of loyalty, of trust, of the nation you build between two people. You were boring, she spat, suddenly sharp, teeth bared. You were predictable, dull. Jared made me feel alive. You just made me feel monitored. That's because you were lying, I said. Liars always feel watched. It's called guilt. She took a step back, almost tripping on her own fury. This wouldn't have happened if you were a real man, she snapped. I looked her dead in the eye and said, if I wasn't a real man, you wouldn't be this scared. That stopped her. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. She wasn't panicking because I was angry. She was panicking because I wasn't. Because anger can be reasoned with, negotiated. But detachment? Detachment is a closed door with no knob. You think you're winning? She hissed. You think this little performance makes you righteous? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence filled the space between us like a verdict. She paced, rubbed her temples, muttered things under her breath, a storm trying to outrun its own destruction. I was lonely, she finally said, softer now, a change in tactic. You stopped touching me. You stopped seeing me. I nodded. That's true, I replied. Because I started seeing through you instead. She shook her head like she was trying to rattle loose a version of me that might still beg, or plead, or demand explanations she could twist. But he was gone, buried, replaced by this version still, silent, done. You don't even care, do you? She asked, voice trembling now not with anger, but with the slow terror of losing narrative control. Not anymore, I said. And that's how I know I'm free. That's what broke her, not the accusation, not the evidence, but the calm, clinical finality of it. There would be no grand scene, no courtroom-style confession, no sobbing reunion or shouting match she could spin into sympathy. Just me, standing there like a gravestone to the life she tried to rewrite, cold and unmoving. Her hands fell to her sides. Her lips parted but no words came. She was losing altitude now, fast, the confidence drained from her eyes. Because when a manipulator runs out of puppets, all they're left with is the strings. And she could see, clear as day, that I wasn't holding them anymore. I turned slightly toward the door, then paused. By the way, I said, not even looking back, the lawyer already filed the estate trust in my son's name. Jared won't be inheriting anything but memories. Good luck turning those into equity. I didn't wait for her response. I didn't need to. The wind had shifted. The war was over. And the silence I left behind was louder than anything she could scream. It began the same way most victories do, with a checklist. Not rage, not impulse, but sequence. I sat at my desk the morning after the Christmas gathering, still in the same suit, still calm, and opened a yellow legal pad where I wrote, in block letters at the top, Operation Firebird. Petty? Maybe. But precision demands naming your campaigns. First came the accounts, our joint credit cards, our shared online platforms, the emergency savings she thought was just a cushion, but had grown under my quiet discipline to nearly 6 figures. I drained it into an account under my name only, established long ago in case of, as my father put it, emotional insurgency. I left just enough to look untouched. Then I changed the passwords on everything digital, Netflix, utilities, insurance, even the damn Spotify account, not because it hurt her, but because it reminded her who built the life she was nesting in. I scheduled a stop transfer on the car she used, technically under my name, and arranged for the dealership to collect it by end of week. The same day, I transferred ownership of the storage unit she used for her personal projects to my name. She'd keep the key. Let her find out when she visits and the access code no longer works. I then moved to the estate. Quietly, cleanly, through the family attorney, I enacted the clause in my father's will that allowed me to solidify sole control of the estate in the event of a reputational threat. Turns out, sleeping with 2 heirs while still legally tied to 1 counts. The trust was restructured in my son's name. Jared's name was purged from every line of estate succession. He wouldn't find out for another 3 weeks, when the updated documents were delivered, not by me, but by a notary. Timing matters. You don't fire a missile while the target is expecting fireworks. I called her employer next, not with accusations, not with bitterness. Just a polite inquiry into whether they'd like to be aware that one of their public-facing representatives was engaging in an affair with a business partner tied to their annual foundation donor. HR didn't respond immediately, but 2 days later, she received a pause notice on her contract. I never had to speak her name. Just submitted an anonymous packet of timestamped photos matched against calendar entries and metadata. No commentary. Just facts. Then I wrote a single message to her parents, formal, composed. There's been a betrayal in the marriage. I will be proceeding with a clean separation. No need for concern, your daughter is safe and has my blessing to move on in any way she chooses. That was it. No drama. No slander. Just the weight of calm finality. I didn't call her friends. I didn't need to. I knew word would travel, and when it did, it wouldn't be what I said, it would be what I didn't say that would twist the knife. Silence can be an indictment. Meanwhile, I prepped the divorce paperwork. Pre-negotiated. Bulletproof. I filed quietly, with every clause favoring protection of the estate, our son, and full documentation of her breach of spousal trust. No courtroom. No public spectacle. Just precision ink on legal parchment. Her attorney, once Jared's golfing buddy, received the documents by courier 3 days before New Year's Eve. Right before the gala she'd planned to attend on his arm. The beauty was in the layering. Each domino fell invisibly, until the day she tried to buy a plane ticket and realized her card had been flagged. The day she called the dealership and learned the car wasn't hers. The morning she opened her inbox to find her contract suspended. I even booked a landscaping crew to replant the hedges at the estate's entrance. My final, personal flourish, replacing the roses she loved with cold, sterile boxwoods. She didn't notice the symbolism, but Jared would. Clara still thought she had time. She kept texting me vague emotional prompts. Can we talk? This isn't how it has to end. You're not being fair. I didn't respond. Not because I was cruel, but because she was no longer relevant. She wasn't the target anymore. She was the warning shot. The real target was the illusion, the arrogance that allowed her to think she could manipulate legacy without consequence. The war was never about marriage. It was about authorship. Who gets to write the final chapter? And as I watched her world constrict around her, quietly, silently, efficiently, I knew I had already won. Not because she lost, but because I no longer needed to care if she knew. It happened at the New Year's gala, the one Clara had insisted on attending with Jared, as if walking into a room of old money and old memories draped over a man like him would somehow rewrite her place in the family story. The ballroom was dressed in gold and silence, the kind of silence that doesn't come from awe but anticipation everyone already knew. Not because I told them, but because evidence, when handled properly, spreads like smoke before the fire. Her parents were there. Her sister. The board members of the local arts foundation she once chaired. The friends who used to giggle with her over champagne flutes at charity auctions. They smiled when she walked in, but not the way they used to. Not with warmth. Not with welcome. But with the cold courtesy reserved for someone whose presence is no longer celebrated, just tolerated. Jared looked proud at first, scanning the room like he expected handshakes and admiration. Clara held his arm, a little too tightly, her eyes darting just a little too fast. She wore red, always her power color, but it did nothing to stop the subtle recoil in the room. People moved away instead of toward her. Conversations paused, then continued, not louder, just sharper. I arrived 20 minutes later, alone, dressed in navy and understatement, and nodded politely to those who caught my eye. I didn't seek her out. I didn't need to. Because she saw me before I saw her, I felt it. Her head turned like a weather vane, forced to track the storm she didn't see coming. She smiled, quickly, as if to prove control, but her lips twitched at the corners. The room watched us both, her, with pity thinly veiled as politeness, me, with the quiet deference of a man whose silence had clearly become more dangerous than his voice. Then it started, not a scene, not a confrontation, but a collapse. Her father, usually warm and indulgent, pulled her aside near the bar. He said something low, firm. She nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again, more slowly, like someone accepting the terms of an execution. Her mother didn't speak to her at all, just walked past her with the tight smile of someone who had defended her daughter for the last time. Jared's name was never announced on the Foundation's new donor plaque that night, though Clara had promised him it would be. Instead, the inscription read, "In honor of legacy and quiet strength, the David Morgan Family Trust." The unveiling was quiet. No speech, just a spotlight and a moment. Clara froze when she saw it. Jared looked at her. "You said," he began, but stopped when he saw the placard. His eyes narrowed, not with anger but calculation, and then, like a fuse finally burning out, he stepped away from her. Just a few steps. But enough. Enough that everyone noticed. Enough that she noticed. She tried to laugh, that soft, dismissive chuckle she used to use on me when she thought I was being dramatic. But it didn't land. The room didn't laugh with her. A few guests turned their heads. Most didn't. Her breath caught. Her posture stiffened. And then the worst thing happened. The part no mask can survive. She looked at me. And I was already watching. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Just met her gaze across the room like I was staring through glass. She took a step forward, as if to explain, then stopped. Her face fell, just slightly, as if her body finally registered that there was no script left to follow. No defense. No justification. Just exposure. She tried again, this time toward her sister, who quietly turned away and began speaking to someone else. And then, like water finding its level, Clara's facade finally cracked. The smile faltered. The makeup under her eyes creased with strain. Her lips trembled. Not dramatically, not like in the movies, but like someone watching their social currency evaporate in real time. And the worst part for her wasn't the rejection. It was the awareness that I wasn't the one doing it. I hadn't said a word, hadn't published anything, hadn't thrown a fit. I had simply let the truth arrive, uninvited, undeniable, unrelenting. Her lover gone, her legacy rewritten, her power erased without a single raised voice. And I was still standing, still watching, still unbothered. Because the final blow wasn't the fallout, it was the moment she realized I was already free, that I hadn't come to punish her. I'd come to witness. And in that stillness, in that unbearable moment of eye contact across a room full of people who now knew her name for all the wrong reasons, she broke. Not loud, not messy, just broken. A woman unmasked, undone, and utterly alone. And I stayed. Just long enough for her to see that I had never needed to leave to win. She came at me with shaking hands and fire in her voice, right in the middle of the gala's back hall where the waitstaff were swapping trays and the board members stood in their little circles of clinking glasses and polished grins, only this time. The performance was over. "You think this makes you better?" she shouted, loud enough to turn heads from every direction. "You think you're some noble victim because you planned this circus behind my back?" Her voice cracked under the weight of her fury, but she didn't care. "You humiliated me," she screamed, jabbing her finger toward the entrance, where the new trust plaque now bore my name, not hers, not Jared's. People started turning, whispering. A few gasped. Her mother tried to step in, but Clara shoved her arm away like a child who just found out Santa lied. I stood still, unmoved, not flinching as she circled me like a wounded animal desperate to bite. "You made me look like a fool," she barked again, but this time, her voice wavered, cracked at the edges like glass under pressure. And I looked her dead in the eye and said, calmly but loud enough for the crowd now gathering, "No, Clara, you made yourself look like a fool. I just stopped covering for you." That hit harder than anything else I could have said. It wasn't dramatic. It was clean. True. Final. Her father stood 10 feet away, red-faced with shame, shaking his head slowly like he didn't recognize his daughter anymore. My sister stood behind me, arms crossed, watching like the finale she always knew was coming. And then Jared tried to slip away, cowardly, as always, but Clara noticed. "Don't you walk away from me," she snapped at him. "We're in this together." Jared froze. Everyone turned. "No, Clara," he said carefully, voice low, hands raised like he was backing away from a car crash. "We were never in this. You told me he was done. You told me you were leaving him. You never said anything about—" "Oh, shut up," she screamed, cutting him off. "You loved this, every minute of it. You're just mad you don't get the estate now." A collective murmur rolled through the crowd like thunder. I could feel the shift, the way her mask was now shredded beyond repair. "You cheated on your husband," someone whispered. "With him," another gasped. Phones were out now. Recording. Clara saw it. "You want to film this?" she shouted, turning to the phones. "You want the truth? Fine. He stopped loving me years ago. He made me feel like a piece of furniture, just another antique he could polish and forget about." I stepped forward, slowly, not to tower, but to end it. "You're right," I said clearly, loud enough to command silence. "I stopped loving you when I realized love meant nothing to you. When I realized loyalty was just a costume you wore until someone richer walked by. You didn't fall out of love. You fell into greed. Into Jared. Into yourself. And the only thing I regret," I paused, letting the words burn, "is that I didn't stop pretending sooner." Her face fell, crumpled not by volume, but by precision. She tried to respond, to throw another insult, but the words caught. "You never made me feel seen," she stammered. "I made you feel safe," I said, without blinking. "I gave you the keys to a legacy, and you tried to pawn it for a thrill. That was the last straw." Her face twisted into something feral, broken, humiliated. She slapped my chest, not hard, not enough to hurt, just enough to remind everyone she had nothing left but fury. "You smug bastard," she hissed. "You think everyone's on your side now?" I glanced around. My son watching from the stairwell. Her parents standing in silent judgment. Jared practically hiding behind a column. The donors. The friends. The staff. No one stepped forward to help her. No one moved to defend her. And that was the answer. "No," I said, turning to leave, my voice even. "I don't think they're on my side. I think they finally see who was on yours all along." She stood frozen, shaking, her once perfect hair now a tangled metaphor for everything she'd unraveled. Tears finally came, and not defiant ones, not performative, but the real kind. The kind that show up when the act fails. And I didn't comfort her. I didn't look back. I just walked out through the crowd, calm, composed, finished. Because revenge isn't about what you take. It's about what they lose in front of everyone. The fall wasn't sudden. It was slow, humiliating, and public in the quietest, most suffocating way imaginable. Her job, once the center of her pride, suspended her indefinitely after donors began pulling funding over image concerns. Jared vanished within days of the gala, ghosted her completely, his number disconnected, his social media scrubbed clean of any trace of her existence, like she was a bad investment he regretted making. Her friends, once a loud chorus of wine-clinking enablers, all went radio silent, group chats deleted, invites dried up, not one message returned. Even her Instagram, once a highlight reel of curated perfection, said abandoned, bleeding followers by the hundreds, her comments section littered with polite silence or passive-aggressive reminders of what she'd done. Her own parents moved to Florida 3 months later, didn't tell her they were going, just gone, and her sister changed her number after Clara showed up at her doorstep unannounced, crying about second chances. No one was listening anymore. She ended up moving out of state to a town where no one recognized her last name, picking up part-time work at a home decor store, pretending not to flinch when customers glanced at her too long. Her wardrobe went from heels and silk to scuffed flats and neutral sweaters, survival wear. No one asked her about her past, and she didn't offer it. The affair, once her great rebellion, became her scarlet letter, visible to anyone who looked too closely. But the worst part, the part one know eats her alive, is that I never once reached out. Not a single text, not a single word, not a single breadcrumb of closure. I gave her the gift she never gave me, total, merciless silence. And then, 6 months later, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, she showed up at my house. I'd moved on, of course, remodeled the place, repainted every surface she'd once touched, cleared out the last trace of her from my life like it was toxic mold. She stood there on my porch in the same trench coat she wore the night she left for Jared's, only this time, it sagged on her frame like it didn't belong. Her eyes were hollow, makeup smeared from what I assume was either desperation or a long drive filled with ugly truths. I opened the door just wide enough for her to speak. She didn't beg at first. She tried to smile, the same way she used to before lying. It didn't hold. I wanted to say I'm sorry, she whispered. You didn't deserve what I did. I was lost. And I thought I could find something better, but I didn't. I just ruined everything. I didn't respond. I just watched. I still love you, she said next, her voice breaking into that familiar plea she once used to get out of arguments. I miss our life. I miss you. I'll do anything to try again. Please, just say something. I looked at her for a long time, long enough for the rain to collect on the brim of her coat, long enough for her eyes to fill again, and then I said, strange. I don't even remember your name anymore. Her face crumpled like paper, and before she could respond, I closed the door. Slowly, quietly, permanently. And as I stood there in the stillness, I felt nothing. No victory, no gloating. Just clarity, the kind that only comes after a long war you never wanted to fight but refused to lose. She had burned the bridge. I just made sure it stayed ash. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it found you at the right moment. Where are you from? And more importantly, did you enjoy the fall?